All right. I think we should get started. And I have a very vague agenda for the discussion today because I am kind of curious to hear what people's reactions to the book were and to allow that to direct the course of the conversation. I definitely have some questions and topics of discussion that I want to get to, but I wanted to, first, before we start the discussion, I wanted to remind people, I'm sure that many of you have read the entirety of the book, but we're going to try to approach the discussion from the perspective of only the section that's been assigned. So we've just read the first 60 pages in the Hogarth translation edition. So make sure to confine your comments and insights to the extent you can to what we have access to in that first 60 pages. So no spoiler. That's my no spoiler warning. So I wanted to just open the floor to brave souls who will tell me their reaction to the first 60 pages. And to start off that conversation, I will tell you I received at least 4 texts in the last week that said, I had no idea how funny this novel would be. So I know that's one reaction that people had, is that they were taken aback by the comedy of the first 60 pages. But other thoughts and reactions to the first 60 pages? Are you hooked? What interests you? What anything?
Well, I'm hooked. I guess I'll start us off. And I found it hysterical.
Mm-hmm.
Um, just one of my favorite lines. Where was it? Sorry, I have all of them up here. And since Gilead had gotten rid of her lice, this proved that he had given it to her in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Just lines like that, where that whole chapter was incredible. And I
Mm-hmm.
find Gilead so intriguing. And what's his name? Theory? How do I say his name?
Theory.
Theory. I liked him a lot too.
I'll have Shoshana correct pronunciation, but I've been calling him Gilliot in my mind. Is that the correct
Oh,
pronunciation?
Yeah, I think Jilliet's right.
Yeah.
And the story is that it's sort of a joke on Juliet,
Ah.
you know, the his very good friend who lived with him and went into exile with him, the young woman. Well, she wasn't so young anymore, but that he kind of wrote her into the book that way.
Oh,
And
interesting.
because it's not that common a name.
Mm-hmm.
And
Okay.
actually that's sort of a feature. There are a lot of names in here that are very weird.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe even for Guernsey, but I think Juliet's right.
Okay. Well, so I guess does anybody else have any initial comments they want to make about their reaction to that?
Well,
I had a
want to
couple
say,
of things. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
okay. I had some mixed feelings.
Okay.
I really liked the first section about this vicious attack on the superstition in the small town. Like that was delightful. Um, I do have a little bit of an issue, at least so far, with the characterization.
Hmm.
I think that Gilead, there's something there, but at least so far, it feels a lot of tell and not show. There is some real showing going on. There is something. I don't want to like be slandering Hugo here, but like for instance, this character of Durishe, the daughter of the steamboat captain,
I think
um,
Déruchette.
Déruchette.
Mhm.
It's all this talk about, oh, she's like a hummingbird and it's a joy when she walks in the room and she plays music, but I don't actually know what she's like at all. I don't know how she actually speaks on a word to word basis. I don't know how she reacts to people when she meets them. She's just sort of an abstraction in my mind. Um so that's it.
I
And
just I want to just add there. It's all set up. The way I feel like it's all set up.
Mhm.
We haven't really gotten into the story yet,
Mhm.
and it's really striking. The first scene makes you want to know, did he follow her?
Oh yeah.
What the heck happened? So you get the two of them in that first scene, and then we don't have any idea what happened after that, because it's all set up from there on. He kind of latch. He gets us involved, and then he just goes around the subject for a long time. At least that's what it seems like to me.
Well, I didn't know even that was Déruchette, because I, haven't read the book
Yeah.
before. So
No, he actually
I'm
mentions her
perfectly
name.
willing to say like he will like pay it off, but I don't like it when a writer tells me all these abstractions about a person, but doesn't actually like give me the evidence first.
Okay. I think since we're in the first 60 pages, we have to wait and see where it's going and whether there's any reason for the way a character is introduced. But I'm glad you brought up that first scene, because I found that first scene absolutely and utterly captivating. And one of the questions that I wanted to discuss was, what was so enthralling about that first scene? And one of the things that occurs to me is how little of her identity there is in that first scene. It's just this figure in the distance that looks kind of, I imagine, coyly over her shoulder as she bends down to write this in the snow. Gilead has absolutely no idea what's happening and could easily be distracted from the fact of what she's doing. It says all the things that, if a boat had come by or something in that moment, he might not have even looked to see. But then, and this is some of the power of Hugo's writing, this was so subtle, but I found it so powerful that when he walks up and looks down to see what it actually was, I got to find the exact line. It says, it was his own name. He was called Gilead. That is such an emphatic statement. It's just such an emphatic but simple way of saying this was big. this had an impact on him, and it's going to mean something. But so there's something so mysterious about it. Why did she do that? What is her motivation? It clearly has an impact on him. What kind of impact will it have? But then, yeah, it just is this brief introductory scene, and then it ends, and then we go on to other things. So I don't know, what did other people think about, thoughts about that opening scene?
Well,
It also,
you're right. It's just it's so enigmatic because we know that she's charming, and we didn't even know his name until she wrote it. So it's as if she's guided him into the story. But what's so wonderful is that we then proceed to the rest of the setup, in which we find out all sorts of things about Gilead that don't necessarily seem reliable. I mean, when the narrator says, well, if somebody's a warlock, he better do what a warlock does, and he cured the girl of lice, so he must have given them to her in the first place. And I think we're a little bit not used to that sort of joke from Hugo, just that so much of what we're getting, you'd have to be an idiot to think that's true, but it looks as if Guernsey is populated by idiots, that they actually believe it. So I think you could say that the mystery of that opening scene hangs over what's coming. Okay, because why? All right, now we know something about his reputation. Why did she write it?
Yeah, I guess that's what I was thinking with regard to what Ray was saying, is that it might help to take the descriptions that you get of Gilead and Déruchette and then read them back into that first scene.
Yeah.
Because there you I think he really beautifully shows in the scene, brings to life all the things that the description, the pages of description are going to elaborate on.
Two things from that opening description that I want to highlight. One that stood out to me was Gilead described as, he was dressed in his workaday clothes, a jacket of coarse brown cloth and trousers with tarpaulin leggings, suggesting that notwithstanding the holy day, he was not on his way to church or chapel. So already he is an outsider in this community. And then this was his thick shoes of rough leather, the soles studded with large nails, left prints on the snow more like the lock of a prison gate than a man's footprint. What sort of impression is that supposed to give us of him? There's something coarse about him. There's something that puts him outside of society. And yet this little young woman who could have been a Parisienne with a light and lively step, she bends down and writes his name in the snow. So I think that was part of what was so enthralling about it too, was the juxtaposition between this coarse outsider and this delicate, pretty young girl.
And she's kind of magic too, because he sees two small fingerprints. Footprints. You know, they don't come in twos. You know, if you're, and I guess it's because she stopped there, that it means that the other steps of her walking disappeared. And well, that doesn't usually happen with people, even little people. So I think, and as you say, we read back things we know about him later. He sort of lives in a world of magic that might not be magic. And so here's this person he doesn't know writing his name in the snow, and she's a young girl. And as you say, she's very different from him. So, and you know, if it's at the beginning, this isn't an accident. It's something that's supposed to be important. I like that opening.
Well, one thing I'll say is, for me, I'm a little bit intrigued by the opening, but since I just had so little context for the characters, my only reaction was sort of like, is this a sort of graceful but flighty and hysterical woman who, you know, who's just writing it down? Like, I don't have like enough reason exactly to care yet about this, of like, oh, okay, some girl wrote a guy's name down in the snow. Maybe it's a sign of affection, or teasing, or I just, at that stage, like, I just don't. I haven't been given enough to care all that much yet.
Well, of course not. It's the
Okay,
opening.
just saying, other hooks are more like, okay, like, this is a nice explosion. I'm ready to get.
It's no explosion. It's no explosion.
Okay.
It's a mystery.
But there is a lot of subtlety there. Like, you do know he's an outsider. She is kind of looking back coyly. She's not running away from this outsider. And, you know, there's an air of confidence. So you get a little bit, like, there's enough there to be pretty.
There's some good characterization. I'm not arguing about that. The scene itself is like, it's like, okay, why should I care? Like, that's just my first reaction.
You sound like Jillian, I guess. Is it, oh, how interesting, she went off. But then he might just walk by her. Like, he's not entranced either.
Okay.
I do feel like that line suggests it kind of stunned him, though. I mean, there's something about, he might have walked by, but once he sees his name, then he's hooked. I mean, it has an impact on him, and as we see in the time to come. But you made the comment about integrating things we learn about them later back into this first scene. And one of them that connects to a description that comes up in this first scene, it describes her as, it reminded me a lot of Cosette when she first encounters Marius, where it describes her as, she has the fugitive grace of bearing that marks the most delicate of transitions, adolescence, the mingling of two twilight periods, the first emergence of a woman in the final stage of childhood. So she's at this transitional state where she's still very innocent, but she has, these feminine wiles to get people to fall in love with her. And one of the descriptions later I know was that she didn't really understand love or know much about love, but she liked to make people fall in love with her. So you do get a sense that she's playing with him a little bit in this scene. And therefore, the impact that it has on him creates another kind of question of what will come and where things will go from here.
I gotta say, I love so much where we ended this week's reading. Like, it just feels like he weaved everything together so wonderfully. Like, especially when you connect it to that opening scene where you've got Juliet and Deschamps' first interaction, and now you've got the setup that Thierry wants to find her a husband, and all the things he wants in that husband, and everything we now know about Juliet. I know, it's just, all the characterization made it got more exciting for me by the end.
Well, okay. So one of the questions that I think will help to orient conversation from here on out is, what is this book in your mind so far? what do you see Hugo as doing in this book? Because I have several answers to that question of what, which one becomes dominant, I think is still a question, but there's so many things he's doing. So what type of a book does it seem to be? What seems to be his emphasis? What sorts of things is he setting out to do here?
Well, so I read this at the beginning of last week, and so it's all kind of like congealed in my mind, and I'm having trouble looking at just the parts about I forget his name, the first guy, without also thinking about what we learned about Leteri. But it seems like it seems to me like Leteri is gonna court him as a son-in-law, like it's gonna be some kind of romance, but it's not, because obviously the sea is gonna come in between them somehow or something like that. But it seems like this charming little setup for this beautiful life and this next generation, and he sounds perfect for her. So yeah, I want it to go really well for them because I like them as characters, all of the characters that have been described so far, and I feel a little bit like it can't go that well, so I'm a little worried for them.
Except maybe Ron 10. He's the exception to the so a romance is one of the things that seems to appear in the first 60 pages. So we've got the setup for a romance is part of it. Anything else occur to people?
Presumably this hideously superstitious town is going to play into it. Like it's just, I mean, it's delightful the way that every little good thing that Gilead does is then twisted around to further proof of his deviltry.
Right.
Like that's just, you really just want to burn the whole place down.
Right. So yeah, well, it's interesting because in the preface, I don't know if people read the preface, but I'm going to take a second to read it quickly here.
So good.
Religion, society, nature. Such are the three struggles in which man is engaged. These three struggles are at the same time his three needs. He must believe, hence the temple. He must create, hence the city. He must live, hence the plow and the ship. But these three solutions contain within them three wars. The mysterious difficulty of life springs from all three. Man is confronted with obstacles in the form, man is confronted with obstacles in the form of superstition, in the form of prejudice, and in the form of the elements. So these are the three obstacles: superstition, prejudice, the elements. Is it Ananke? Ananke. Weighs upon us. The Ananke of dogmas, the Ananke of laws, the Ananke of things. Now, this fascinated me. So dogmas, laws, things. In Notre Dame de Paris, the author denounced the first of these, so laws. In Les Mis, what's that? Oh, dogmas, sorry. Dogmas. In Les Miserables, he drew attention to the second, so that would be laws. In this book, he points to the third, so that is things. With these three fatalities that envelop man is mingled the fatality within him, the supreme Ananke, the human heart. Now, I'm sure Shoshana has something to say about Ananke. My understanding is it's a very intangible, amorphous, hard to pin down sort of word that kind of means fate, fatality, or necessity, or what would you say?
Yeah, well, I don't know Greek, but I think that for Hugo, it can't actually mean that everything is already determined. I mean, I think there's some sense, necessity, reality, things are as they are. And of course, in our book, it's so interesting because we see that Gilead, we can read around the way that other people are seeing him, even though we don't really know where his mother and where he came from and so on, but he does not seem to be someone who has ill intent for people. And yet he's regarded as if he is,
Right.
and there's about the making of a bad reputation. So I think that's one of the things that the book is about. It's about what's really true and what it might look like. There's, surfaces, and maybe that's pertinent to Déruchette, to Gilead, and even to the environment in which we find ourselves. Because, well, let's just say if you're skipping the descriptions of the water and the stones and everything, you will find you don't want to do that, because it's as if we need to be there in order to understand what's happening. Is why I was so pleased when you said that when you went to Guernsey, you thought, really, I ought to have read this book first.
Yes.
And that, yeah. And
I will have read it next time I go there. That's how I'm thinking of it now.
Yeah.
Ananke, I think Ananke has a sense of the necessity, something we can't change, that tends to frustrate our ideals and ambitions. So it's what will disappoint us, that you find in the unavoidable. I think that's a good way of putting it. But it doesn't mean that human beings don't try, but it drags us down.
Is it like a compulsion?
It can be. I think of it, first of all, just regard to if you're trying to make some beautiful piece of craftsmanship, and the materials you have flaws, that you have to adjust yourself to those, which might mean you have to let go of what you really wanted to achieve, because the material stuff just won't do it won't have the strength. If it's thin and beautiful, it doesn't have the strength. If you make it so it has strength, then it's clumsier than you wanted it to be.
So, okay, so if I can go back to my question, we have the setup for a romance. We have the kind of exposing the superstitious nature of this Guernsey society, and what impact that's going to have on Gilead, at least. We have, but that we also, I want to, make this kind of something we center the conversation around too. The dedication of the book. Oh, where do I have the dedication? Hugo said, I dedicate this book to the rock of hospitality and liberty, that corner of old Norman soul where dwells that noble little people of the sea, to the island of Guernsey, austere and yet gentle, my present asylum, my future tomb. So it's also a dedication to Guernsey, where he spent his exile. And it's interesting because we're seeing all this mockery of the Guernsey people, but we've got Lethierry, we've got Déruchette, we've got Gilead, we've got characters who are being given more attention, who aren't, generalized about the people. We've got the people of Guernsey in general and their superstitions, but then we've got these specific characters. And it seems like the specific characters he's really focused on are the toilers of the sea. So there's a line somewhere in there about the workers. There are two types of workers, the workers of the land and the toilers of the sea. And it feels a bit like a love letter to the toilers of the sea too, to these characters who are outside of society. And I want to talk about what that means. What is it? What about Gilead does he highlight as admirable and lovable? And what about Lethierry is so admirable and lovable? Because he does seem to be taking these workers of the sea who are outside of the kind of typical structure of society, who have these virtues that he wants us to notice and focus on and appreciate and admire. That was at least my reaction from being introduced to them.
What do you think about his saying that they're noble and little?
Interesting.
Those two. Those things can always go together.
There's kind of a childlike quality to them, right? There's an a lack of sophistication. Sophistication seems to go hand in hand with conforming to social norms. So there's a childish quality to them that seems to allow them to stand outside of social norms and makes them sometimes uncouth or sometimes coarse or sometimes, but also makes them kind of simple-hearted, truly sentimental souls. So what, for example, Lethieri and his idea of romance. For him, the ideal woman was the one with perfect hands, because somebody, perfect, delicate white hands, because that's what some captain said and it shows such a concrete bound unsophistication about romance. And yet I think of him as a really romantic soul in a certain sense, because of his devotion to his two great loves, the Durand and Déruchette. So he seems capable of a real depth of love, but an unsophisticated, unworldly sort of kind of love. So could that have something to do with the little?
I don't know. I think that as usual, Hugo is saying something that looks simple and then it gets trickier. I mean, he talks about them as being austere and gentle.
Mm-hmm.
Those
I
two
wanted to
things
go
don't
back
always
and
go together.
I want to go back and maybe agree with what Heather said, that it's I yeah, affectionate mockery. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, I wasn't sure all the time. In fact, I wasn't sure at all what the narrator's view of all this was.
Mm.
So because he presented it in such a way that he said, yes, of course you'd think this, of course you'd think that. And that is, I think, on a, if you step back level, it can be hilarious. But I can't tell exactly from the narrator whether he means to be mocking them or he's so delicate with it in a way that's like, or is he just saying, this is the way that they think, this is the way of this people, kind of thing. I don't know, Heather, was that along the lines of what you were thinking?
Yeah, definitely so the way that I think of it, okay, and so I grew up on a fishing island in Newfoundland, and it was an isolated kind of place. And I know exactly what Molly means. I think Molly said it about having a medieval mindset, because I have often thought that about, the people who live there. It is like a medieval kind of, the way that I think of it is that isolation is your whole world, and your world is very small. So you can have nobility, but to somebody who's more worldly, it's a very small nobility. Is how I'm thinking of the way he's talking about it. So if the narrator is somebody who knows a little bit more about the world, but is also a part of the Guernsey society, then he can probably see it both ways. He can see how somebody who only knows that would have that really small view, but he also has that bigger view of,
and because he has that bigger view, he can see how negatively that small view impacts someone like Gilliatt. So
right.
So that's where the judgment comes in, is that they're judging him negatively for things about him that are beautiful. And not really. So he's so kind of in touch with the earth, with the sea. I mean, he really, and with the earth, he's has like real practical knowledge, and then they dismiss that as superstition. He has this compassionate heart, so they condemn him for saving the birds and the children from robbing the birds' nests. I just love that detail of him, or letting the birds, buying birds and letting them free.
Yeah, just on this theme of I guess just the mixture of almost ignorant innocence that we're talking about here. I like it sometimes the way he's presenting it. Like Gilead has he has these thoughts about what if there are fish of the air, big, invisible, transparent, mollusks or whatever, flying about up there. That's a very appealing image, and it's very kind of folksy, but like childlike in a good way. Of why not? That sounds great. I'm on board. So I like that, but the part you mentioned about the theory, when I read that, I automatically hated Lethieri at that point because it just seemed so stupid. Just like, oh, some admirable says this, and then that's what your life is about now. That's how you judge women. I know like there are more positive things, but I really just thought that's going too far. That's a little bit too concrete bound and frankly stupid for me to like that bit of characterization. So, you know.
I thought that was really realistic, personally. I mean, I know that I've had things where somebody says something when I was young and it sticks with you. And, you know, now I know, okay, there's more to, I can't think of an example, but, you know, after a while you realize, okay, it doesn't really mean that, or, you know, you stop being so concrete. But again, I think it's that, like, I don't want to say small-mindedness, because it's not small-minded, it's small experience.
Though
Well, but he's a man of the world. I mean, that's one thing
He's
about
been
him.
everywhere.
He's gone all up down China and India and Madagascar and whatever. Like, grow up. That's kind of my feeling about that line about Lethieri.
Well,
I want to suggest that we withhold criticisms of the writing until we have a handle on the story. Okay, because I feel like it's taking us off track to spend so much time saying what we don't, what you don't like about the way characterizing something, when I don't even think we've made much progress in understanding any of the characters. So let's start with that and then bring in reservations about the characterization later. I mean, we can talk, why don't we talk about the characters, each of the characters? So what impressions did people have of Gilliatt? When I received a couple of texts this week about how funny it was, my response was usually, yes, it's hilarious, but also I heart Gilliatt. I was absolutely enamored of him immediately from the start. And it's not that he's like a great hero in every dimension and respect. It's that there's something so appealing and lovable about him, and that he does seem like the kind of character who might be overlooked by us, so that Hugo is focusing us in on and drawing our attention to somebody who's outside of society and social norms in a way that we might not appreciate what is so wonderful about them. So let's see, what do people have to say about him?
I loved the way Hugo exposes his benevolence. Right, the lines, like some of the ones I highlighted about when he catches the boy coming down the tree with a nest full of newly hatched tree, and just how he like seems to care so much about people and takes great care to prevent people from doing wrong, or you know, when the kids are falling off the cliff, and I'm trying to remember, I didn't highlight exactly what he did, but he did something to try and help prevent them from being able to climb there. He just seems like such a thoughtful, kind person. So I love that. I loved how Hugo just weaves that into, especially with the backdrop of everyone being critical of him or thinking he's a magician, and yet you get to see this like really just kind soul shine through is what stuck with me.
And he has this like he's so capable. He has this connection, this kind of first-handed connection to reality that makes him so capable. And then they, you know, accuse him of being a warlock because of his capability. But like there was also the example of he altered the gutter and the water became pure. You know, he did something very practical to correct the problem they were having, and then that proved he put a spell on the water in the first place. Or he, you know, makes all these mysterious remarks about farming and about, you know, things he observes that then if people follow his advice, they sound like incantations almost, but if people follow his advice, then it works out well for them. But it's really just kind of homey wisdom said in a kind of in a way that sounds, it reminds me, for people who read Chanticleer, it reminds me of the white hen poking her head up saying some, or the old hen. But anyway, he has these phrases of homey wisdom that are actually reflect real knowledge and are very practical. And he doesn't seem to concern himself with people condemning him or judging him. He just dispenses his wisdom generously, despite people's reactions.
Yeah, I love that too. He's not bitter about it. He's still willing to share the advice to help fix the problem. And kind of, I always just imagine him shrugging or laughing it off when they accuse him of witchcraft after actually fixing their problem.
Yeah. Or just not reacting to it at all.
Yeah, I like this over on 77 for the characterization. The paragraph starts, after all, he was only a poor man who could read and write. Probably he was on the borderline between the dreamer and the thinker.
Yeah.
Now this, it's almost as if the Victor Hugo we know has come into the novel now to just, to describe things philosophically. The thinker wills what happens, the dreamer accepts it. Well, those two things sound almost like opposites rather than on something that could be a spectrum and that you could be on the line in between. Solitude adds a quality to simple people and gives them a certain complication. All right. Well, complication and simple. Sacred awe, shadowy area composed of two elements, obscure but very different. Ignorance and weakness within, mystery and immensity without. Now, I don't think we think of him as weak, but it's interesting that the writer somebody's telling us that there's something weak there. So I think there's almost a wait and see about the characterization, including the very opening of that chapter. Girls considered him ugly. He was not ugly. Okay, so I guess that means girls aren't supposed to be, or people who are going to go by superficial impressions shouldn't be reading this book, because you're going to find out that you're wrong. And so I like the way you could, that it's a characterization. We have a lot of information, but we're still working on integrating it, because he is just one person. He's not just a list of qualities, and we haven't got to the center of what's the most important thing about him. And maybe that's a subject.
Yeah. And so back to the kind of, I get the sense that he has reverence for Gilliatt and for Lethieri. There's an admiration for them. And it seems like what we're supposed to see is that simplicity can be deceptive. Yes, there are ways in which they are very simple. And I think the equating the romantic ideal with delicate white hands is evidence of the simplicity, but that that they're going to be perceived as simple because they don't have the kind of means of interacting with society that we might expect from somebody complex. But don't mistake that for a simplicity of soul. There's a capacity for sacred awe here. There's a visionary quality. There's a dreamer's quality. And so I felt like he was saying, don't mistake toilers of the sea. Don't mistake the worker for being, blunted in terms of the depth of his soul. The depth, the kind of depth of soul that he has might be different from the kind that you're accustomed to. But it's still there. And so what that looks like, I think we're just getting little hints of that. But I love, we think of workers, as being uneducated, maybe not literate, maybe not, but he wants us to see the capacity for sacred awe in somebody who's just toiling on the sea.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So come on, the regatta story. It's amazing. His pure efficacy, his capability as a sailor. So not only does he do what can't be done, he does it with an added flourish because he brings back the cannon along with the cargo that he was supposed to return. So like, I'm going to do something just, and it seems so matter of fact. It doesn't even seem show offy or like he's got something to prove. He's just going to win this, and he has seemingly effortless capability to do it. So part of what makes me love him. So there's that sentimental side of his soul that comes out with the freeing and rescuing the birds. There's the incredible capability that he has as a sailor and just incredible strength and efficacy. There's his kind of simple sensibility and like basic knowledge that he has that he shares, and even though he gets condemned for it. Well, I'm not sure what to make of his seeming now to fall madly in love just at the seeing his name written in the snow.
Forgot a Story also is a bond between him and Lettieri. You know, he kind of holds out his hand and he applauds him. And so it's almost as if we see this whole town of fools and idiots, but there are few people who are different in a good way, even if we don't understand. And he holds out his hand to, I guess I think if there were music, I'd kind of want to hear the music right there. You know, he holds out his hand to him, and that's like the button on the episode, is that he did all that, and then he's
got the admiration of Lettieri.
Yeah, I like that. There's a bold seaman for you, and saying it in the hearing of everybody else, and we know what everybody, other people have views. You know, he's the man with the bad reputation. I know.
And when I asked the question about what kind of a novel this is, another thing I wanted to add to the list is admiration for progress. That is a big theme in these first 60 pages, with the story of the steamship and the antagonism to the steamship and Lettieri's independence of judgment and intrepidity in deciding this was something he was going to pursue, and also the way that we see people adapting to it afterwards when they're confronted with how effective and profitable it actually is. So that was another element.
That's something I'm finding so exciting about this first part, and almost like a powder keg he's creating. I'm wondering if this is where some of the conflict is going, because you're in this place where, like, the way he's setting it up is we're on like the precipice of this tip into the Industrial Revolution, right? We've got a shift that's happening. You've got Guernsey, which is even more isolated than probably other parts of Europe. And now it's unavoidable because now the progress is coming in the form of the steamship, which is allowing new goods. It's just this, and he's giving you this picture of what their mindset is, which is not pro-progress, right? It doesn't seem like they're going to come into this new world willingly, but you've got this inevitability that's coming, kind of embodied in Gilead and Theory. And I don't know, I find that very exciting to see what's going to happen. How it's all kind of set up really nicely now of that conflict.
Well, should we talk about Lettieri too?
Before we leave
Sure.
Gilead, a couple of things. One is, I guess I feel about him that he's very interesting, but I want to talk to him. I'm not. I don't feel like I know enough to think to be in love with him until I hear more and see him more intimately, rather than just from the more from the outside. I was really interested in what I think Shoshana brought up, the dreamer part. I'm not fully feeling that, and I think it's connected also with on 82. What he says about sleep. He went so far as to observe sleep. Did anybody understand or resonate with that description of what he thinks about sleep or how he feels about sleep? This is a, yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it did feel a little bit like a departure, like Hugo was having fun in vision. And so the thing that it seemed to communicate to me is just this sort of the kind of dreamer and sense of wonder within Gilliatt, but the specifics of the, fish are inhabiting the air. I didn't really know what to make of that. It led to one of those great Hugo distillations in the last line. The dream world is the aquarium of night.
Mm-hmm.
That's beautiful, but I wouldn't say it resonated with me in the way you're saying that, like, oh yes, I understand exactly what it means for the dream world to be the aquarium of night. But it seemed like a good summation of that kind of wild description that he had just created.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it's almost as though Gilliatt has his own superstitions. He's not any more immune from it than the other islanders. His are just different. And he came up with them on his own as opposed to being passed on.
But are they superstitions in the same sense? I mean, the superstitions of the Guernsey people seem to be things that put them at odds with other people, the things that make them pronounce judgment, things that make them go awry, things that it's really negative in its impact. Whereas here, the description is he had an element of hallucination, something of the visionary. Such visions sometimes have a transfiguring effect, turning a camel driver into a Muhammad, a goat girl into a Joan of Arc. I mean, that's what this quality turns you into, a visionary. Solitude brings out a certain amount of sublime exaltation. And then he gives other examples, and he says, usually the visionary state overwhelms a man and stupefies him. There is such a thing as divine besottedness. Love that description. But so it doesn't seem like something that stunts. It's not a quality that stunts him like it seems to the Guernsey people.
I feel like the thing that stunts the Guernsey people is not the superstition, but the like everybody being in on it and the conformity that it enforces, and where they all share this superstition, which somebody came up with, some visionary came up with at some point, but they're not visionaries, and he's coming up with his own stuff. But it's not any more, reality than theirs are, really. It's just that they don't have a tradition behind them. So I don't know, that's how I read his characters. As
there's certainly, you could describe both as superstitions in that respect. I think that Hugo sees them as something very different. The narrator seems to have admiration for this quality. The narrator does not seem to have admiration for the quality of superstition. Maybe acceptance, maybe toleration, maybe, benevolent judgment, but not admiration. This seems to be something that he thinks is good in Gilliatt.
Well, I think that we've got a lot of negativity about fixed beliefs that are harmful. I mean, a woman being burned and delivering a child and someone throwing the baby back into the flames, that's very hard to defend. I mean, and there are other kind of gruesome examples, but Gilliatt's idea that he's inhabiting a world in which there are things that other people can't see, and yet they're there. I think Victor Hugo thought that. Yeah. This is sort of the time when he was doing the table rapping.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, everybody knows that when he would write down what they would say, they somehow seem to be speaking his kind of prose. So it's similar, as maybe it's Graham Robb said, they were speaking fluent Hugoese, and you might think that would occur to him as appropriate or something, but I think he did believe that for some period of time. that there were presences, and Gilliatt, he's not taking dictation from the spirits, but it's as if there's, and this is, we've seen that before, this notion of a presence that's not actually there. In Hugo, he thinks that dead people are still with us. So I think this is definitely positive.
And it's something about, the Gilliatt's type being solitary and outside of society that gives him the capacity to put himself in touch with these things.
Yeah.
And that does connect to another theme of these early pages and of the dedication of the book, which is the kind of life of an exile is something that comes up sometimes as an aside, sometimes as sort of central to the story, I think. But Hugo was writing this as an exile in Guernsey, and it seems like he has the sense that being exiled and alone and solitary maybe gives you this capacity, helps to create an opportunity to make a connection to these broader presences, whatever they are.
Do you think so? One of the things that's striking me here is that there's something about this section that shows you the real inner life of Gilliatt. So we see a lot of how the townspeople, the Guernsey people think of him. We see how amazing he is in all the things that he accomplishes. But whereas for Lethierry, I think accomplishing is what he lives for. It's almost like we're seeing with Gilliatt here that, he just sort of steps out of this. He lives in a dream world. That's where he's most at home. And he comes out of it when things need to be done, and he does them really well. But where his soul is much more, I think, in this reverie, this world of reverie, dream, to the extent that he feels like it's in sleep that he's getting closer and closer to where he really wants to be. I don't know, does that seem?
Yeah, I think that's possible.
Interesting.
That's has a kind of reality for him.
So that when in that earlier passage where it says the thinker, what does it say? The thinker wills and accomplishes or something, whereas the dreamer accepts. Lethierry is the thinker, the one who thinks things out and accomplishes, and that's what he lives for. Whereas though Gilliatt can do that, he more lives in a continuous reverie, because he's rarely, for most of the time of his life, people don't impact him.
Which seems, he was essentially born alone. He has his mother figure. I don't know we don't know what their relationship was exactly. And one of the things that I found very poignant, I have to be careful of my own warning. Did we get to the part of, no, I don't think we did. Okay, I'll consult my notes to make sure I don't go ahead. He really lives in total isolation. So his existence is almost of his own imagination, aside from the practical work that he does. I don't know how to interpret what Hugo thinks about that, except that it does strike me as admiration, the way it's presented, that it's a special quality of his, that a special kind of visionary quality of his, that his circumstances and his nature allow him to tap into. But it's pretty vague and intangible to me what that quality actually is, or what he's saying it is.
I wonder if we can imagine what it's like to be on that rock, the seat of Gildomur?
Yeah.
And to be able to be there and sit for hours without wanting anything more, but never getting lost so that he gets trapped.
Perfect. Yeah. So he's got the thinker, practical side, efficacious side of him, which means he would never get trapped on that rock the way other people do. But he could very happily sit there and dream away the hours and be content with that. So there's something admired in that. Well, can we go to Le Thierry now? The efficacious man of action. I just loved this visual on page 87. Well, first of all, okay, just picking up on fragments that I have underlined here. He's a leading figure, a redoubtable sailor. No one knew the sea as he did. He was intrepid at rescue work. Didn't matter who was in trouble, the devil himself, he rescued him. He would, call on people to help him to do the rescues. If they weren't available, didn't matter. He'd go by himself. And then this description. Then he would be seen in the distance amid the gusting winds and the lightning, standing erect in his boat, dripping with rain, like a lion with a mane of foam. And then he would go home and knit a pair of stockings. So is this formidable, intrepid figure, and you have to really visualize that scene. But then I don't know, what do the stockings tell us?
That it's normal. Like, oh, this is part of my routine. Let me go some stockings now. Like now that I'm done with that chore.
That's true. I hadn't even thought of that, but it's like those are on a par with each other. I don't know, some kind of domesticity too. I get maybe some sort of prelude to the love that he has for his niece. And also maybe the simplicity that we would see if we didn't know what he was capable of out at sea, conducting his rescues. One thing I just have to mention about reading Hugo is the number of absolutely brilliant and ingenious asides in the story, just observations about life in general that I say, oh, wow, that's fascinating and really true. So one that strikes me here is he was compelled to give up the sea and pass from the heroic to the patriarchal age. He was now just a harmless old fellow, rheumatic-y and comfortably off. These two products of a man's labor often come together. At the very moment when you become rich, you're paralyzed. So that is a poetically put truth about life, that by the time we have the means to do what we want, we don't have the physical capability of it anymore.
Could I just insert a little criticism onto these asides, though?
Sure.
Like there was an entire page where he's just talking about how nautical terminology used to be.
Yeah.
And I think there was another one where was like he's just describing like, oh, it can carry 300 whatever and it's 400 bride. And it's like no, I don't care. This is tedious. Like there's great asides, but then there's things that are like, please, Hugo, please.
Yeah, he has his custom, and I found it in the 93. Right?
Mm-hmm.
I found that there as well, of having a paragraph where it seems like there are 24 it just gives you 24 details all the time.
Yeah.
And I always get weary with that. So I don't know, Lisa, what do you think of that?
I cannot justify them literally, and there are parts of 93 that I actually excerpt for my students. So I have my own abridged version, but I just love Hugo so much that I like watching him indulge in his love for this thing.
Okay, yeah.
So sometimes I might join in with him and try to follow it and see what it is that he's so obsessed about. But there I just saw his profound love of language and fascination with Guernsey. But there are parts that I just kind of, okay, he's doing that again, and just skip ahead a little bit.
Was that a criticism people had of him in his own lifetime, or is this a style that people liked?
Shoshana?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was an exaggeration of what some other writers did. But I think part of the reason he did it is that he would sometimes be accused of making all this stuff up And he made up a lot of stuff that couldn't possibly happen. And so here he's got some facts, and here's some facts. How about this? You can look it up. And I think also he had this enormous way of, things were so interesting to him that he wanted to tell you. And you probably know this, a lot of people have issues with that whole Waterloo section in Les Miserables, and which he did write after he'd written the rest of the book. You know, he went to Waterloo, etc. But one of the things that he said was, he said, well, it was necessary for me to write this, even if it is not necessary for you to read it.
Mm.
And the Waterloo part does have a little plot element, but it also has a lot of theme in it.
Yeah.
On the other hand, sometimes he just goes through slang,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
you're not going to remember. But
Yeah.
but again, it's as if this is true. You know,
Mhm.
this is something real, and he found it, and he wants to share it with you.
Yeah.
Well,
It seems irrelevant though to the criticism. It's like the things they're criticizing Hugo for, like being unrealistic. It's not because I'm sorry, this nautical slang is just out of date, Hugo. You know, like no one's criticizing him for that, or the dimensions of your ship is just wrong. No, it's other things. So it feels, I don't think that's a plausible reason. I think it seems more just like, oh yeah, he just loves this stuff. He just loves the French language or whatever, and can't contain himself literally.
Literally. I'll just happily tolerate it and know my own limitations and skip ahead when I need to. Let's see. Other things about lay theory. Oh gosh. Okay, here's another description we can't miss. So he is that, did I get the page number wrong? I can't find the page number, but it was him being undaunted by any storm. It says he was determined to be obeyed. So much the worse for the sea if it resisted authority. So he's going to be obeyed even by the sea itself. It would just have to accept the fact. For him, the word no did not exist, either in the mouth of a man.
92.
92, okay. Either in the mouth of a man or the rumbling of a thundercloud. That's formidable. The strength of Polyphemus, the will of Columbus, the logic of the weather vane, with something of a bull and something of a child about him. So that's where that he explicitly mentions that childlike quality, and that leads pretty quickly into, I think, his two loves, the Durand and Déruchette. Okay, so he's got this absolute formidability at sea. He's got the intrepidity of a rescuer who will rescue anybody who's in need. And then there's the whole story of the devil boat. So the devil boat story struck me both as giving good characterization to lay theory and his independence and his determination despite opposition, and also a little just example of what happens when progress is introduced into a very tradition-bound society. And so many, I mean, there's so many things that could be talked about in there, but this was, you know, this was not the first time that the advance of progress had been called a return to chaos. Learned men had rejected the steamship as impossible. The priests, for their part, had rejected it as impious. Science had condemned it. Religion damned it. So those are the forces that he has to defy in order to see this become a reality. But then there's so much subtlety into the description of it too. So it's not just, well, some other things that he highlighted that I loved were the fact that we might look back on the steamboat on lay theory's steamboat and see it as really primitive technology. But there was this great line about progress in science, that every embryo conceived by science has a double aspect. As a fetus, it is a monster. As a germ of something more, it is a marvel. So there's this incredible admiration for progress. And you know, whatever, however primitive we might look upon it now, it was a turning point and took someone like Lethieri to see it through. Well, what about Déruchette? Ray doesn't think she was characterized, but what are...
I feel like we just got a glimpse, like a taste. There wasn't a lot on her relative to the...
We don't see her in action very much. We do get a lot of description of her. I found the description myself really fascinating. Just the idea. I was talking to, I think, Lana afterwards, trying to think of other characters who would fit that description, or even people I knew in real life, where the whole section about her being charm personified, basically, filling the most important function on earth, being charming. It says the forest would be in despair without the hummingbird, to shed joy around, to radiate happiness, to emit light amid dark things, to be the gilding on our destiny, to be harmony and grace and kindness. Is not this to render a service? That's...
What did Lana say?
Did we come up with anybody? Oh, yes, you did.
The one I came up with was, I can't remember her name, but Lizzie's older sister in Pride and Prejudice.
Jane,
yeah. Which I think is close, but not perfect. But I think it's sort of a similar idea.
All the world is agreeable in your eyes. Like she's just radiating.
The one that made me think it was Natasha from War and Peace. Natasha is this very, very similar in lighting, and Lily James plays her in a more recent War and Peace, and she's just does a beautiful job of it. But
I find it very, sorry, just gonna comment that I find it very interesting that Hugo compares her to a bird and give her all these qualities, and how Gilead loves birds, and maybe these are the qualities that he likes.
I totally missed that. That's funny.
Since she's got little sense of responsibility, so that's a negative. I'm just saying, you know, and that's why, you know, Jane Bennett, she's got a sense of responsibility, and the notion here, I think, is that, you know, this is all very well and good for Déruchette now, but she's going to have to grow as Natasha did. You know, it's not sustainable. So maybe that's part of the picture of her. Is that,
but it is the way men want them to stay that way. Zach had something.
Oh, you're muted.
I just like the description of the line. She perhaps did not know the meaning of the word love, but she liked people to fall in love with her, but she had no ulterior motive. An old French nobleman, an emigre who had settled into St. Sampson, used to say, the girl is flirting with powder. I assume that means gunpowder. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I liked he also said perhaps. And then when I think of the opening scene, when she writes the name in the snow, I'm like, oh, she knows what she's doing. She knows exactly what she's doing. And
she knows what she's doing, but she has no ill intent.
I know. And that's, I don't know that though yet. Knowing it yet. Cause I think of like the movie Cool Hand Luke, when there's a scene where the guy goes, she doesn't know what she's doing. And then the other guy goes, she knows exactly what she's doing and she's loving it. So I don't know what her character is yet, but with the gunpowder thing, I was thinking, ooh, she might have something here. She might be less innocent than I'm reading, you know, more intelligent.
Yeah, I wonder if she's
I don't know yet.
She doesn't think beyond the moment or the day. She wants to make she wants to make Juliet follow her because it will be, for all we know, because it will be fun and he'll come to be in love with her. But then Juliet will become in love with her.
Yeah.
And then what's she going to do then? Because she didn't want that to, she never really thought about that.
Right.
Exactly.
She's not mean spirited, but she doesn't have any idea of what she can do to a guy.
I think
like
that's why I think we have to take seriously that she had no ulterior motive.
Okay.
And also that early line about her being at that transitional point between adolescence and adulthood, that it's an unthinking quality that she's noticed that she has this power to make people fall in love with her, but she doesn't know anything about the consequences of that. So
and then one day the powder will ignite and she'll figure it out.
The powder will ignite. Yeah.
May I say something? I see Déruchette, she's shown as pretty much an airhead, but at the same time, we get a little foreshadowing that she knows that there's more to life than that, because on page 121 at the bottom, it says she woke up each morning without a thought of what she had been doing the previous day. You'd embarrass her if you asked her what she'd done last week. But then it says, yet in spite of all of this, there were more troubled moments when she had a mysterious sense of disquiet, a feeling that something of the darker side of life was passing over her gaiety and her joy. So I think she sees that there's more to life than what she is, but she doesn't yet know what.
Yeah. So that's that transition. She's starting to see that.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or just, I'm looking down now that you say that, she knew nothing at all of life. She had all that was required to fall someday madly in love. In the meantime, she was lightheartedly happy. So writing his name in the snow is just lighthearted happiness. It's not love. But someday she'll have the means to be in love.
Well, how she's supposed to be adolescent, right? 11, 12, right around there.
No.
Do you think older?
No, she's older.
You think she's older?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Because there was a remark about her being on the cusp of childhood to adolescence.
Spiritually. She's on the cusp between adolescence and adulthood. But she's of marriageable age for sure.
Okay. Do we know how old Gilead is?
I don't know.
Well,
I got the sense of late 20s, maybe.
He was 30, but he looks 45.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, 77. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Okay, well, two other characters we're introduced to, I don't know if we want to say anything about them, are Ron Ten, who's the only uncontroversially villainous one, born into a house of dubious reputation, taken in by Lethéry, takes him for all his money. It says his whole life had been a series of eclipses, appearing, disappearing, reappearing. Gave me the sense that we may not have seen the last of him. He was a rogue fitted with a revolving light. One line that kind of made me chuckle and from its awfulness is, it says he was capable of anything and of worse than that. So yeah, he's ruined Lethéry financially, but I feel we may see him again. And then there was,
sorry, I'm trying to find the line, but there is still something really, one of the lines when Hugo's describing it, no one on Guernsey knew anything of his adventures. And he says he had seen the world and seen life. There was still something like magnanimous or something about it.
Flamboyant, kind of flamboyant about him. There was that line about the Harlequin cloak. If I don't remember what it was, but if you wore your life, his would be a Harlequin cloak. And Clubin. We're just introduced to him by description. Reputed.
This whole part is called Sir Clubin, so he seems like he's supposed to be the central figure here.
But he's only introduced by description at the end.
Yeah.
Reputed for absolute integrity, excellent and competent seaman, faced danger in proportion to what was known to him, and he's the one who warned Leithiri about Ron 10. He could see through him and said he's no good.
Can I just make a little comment about just that in terms of the style of that? Is it's all these assertions about, oh, he's competent, he's so honest, he saw through this other guy, but I there's no concretes to verify that yet. And as in, like, if it's like, oh, he was able to see this aspect of the other guy's character, the way he talked about this or whatever, like that made him deduce how he was bad, or you actually get to see him behind the wheel or at the steerage or whatever. You know, it's like, okay, then I can believe it. But it's like, okay, you've just nailed these very eloquent abstractions to this person, and maybe that'll be verified later, but I don't like just, or maybe this because introduction, and then we see the character immediately, but I just have a problem with that, like, way of writing.
Mm-hmm. Well, it seems like he gave most of his attention to the characterization of Gilliatt and the ways in which it's at odds with the perceptions of the people of Guernsey who are immersed in superstition.
No, that's good. I was thinking specifically about, like.
Oh no, I know. It's a question in my mind if he has a reason for treating simply and abstractly certain characters when he first introduces them. I'm not sure. I'm not justifying that. I'm not saying he does, but it's just interesting to figure out to observe what he fleshes out in great detail, and what he just gives you a brief introduction to.
Well, he's still characterizing Leteri, really. He's telling about Leteri, and then he's describing these characters sort of in the context of what they mean to him. So maybe it's just not called for here. The same with Déruchette, really. He is introducing Déruchette, but really he's talking to us about what it is that Leteri loves so much.
True. She's not really an actor in the story yet, aside from that opening scene. That's true. Well, in that sense, what has happened plot-wise, really, up to this point? It's an interesting thing to think about, too. Jillian read his name in the snow, and is that the only plot point so far?
It's all in background, in history, and setting everything up.
Yeah. So we've had an interesting situation set up.
Yet it still feels like there's so much exciting, like there's still so much anticipation I have about what's about to happen next, which is funny to think about, given that nothing's happened also.
Yeah.
And yet there's so much that he's weaved together.
Powder.
I think the one consequence of all this is that I don't really want Juliet to fall in love with Déruchette, not right now. It's like, no, you're above this.
Mm-hmm.
You should fall in love with you.
And she's not taking it serious. She doesn't appear to be taking this seriously.
Got a bad feeling about this.
Mm-hmm. Well, so not a lot has happened action-wise, and a lot of this was set up, but putting aside extended passages on sailing terminology, did people feel intrigued and excited to read the first section? I mean, part of the issue is that I could read Hugo writing about anything, because he just makes the most trivial of things seem absolutely fascinating. But it does all have to add up into a story to be ultimately worthwhile. But I definitely felt very happily along for this ride so far.
I guess I was with Ray in the first reading, and it's like, it's interesting, but it's kind of a slog. There's so much that's being suggested about them, but I want to go back and follow that scene out. So, but this discussion has really helped me get more excited about it. So.
Okay. Well, it's always, there's a hazard in breaking these discussions down into 6 sections as opposed to discussing the whole book the way people often do for book groups. The hazard is that we've stopped, and we've stopped pretty early on, and maybe we haven't gotten the momentum we need to really get our foot into the story. Because when I read this, it was after I had just visited Guernsey. 2 quick asides on visiting Guernsey. I stood in the square where supposedly those witches were burned and the baby thrown back in the fire. So apparently that's a true story. And I saw where that happened. Also, Gilliatt's haunted house, the Bout de la Rue, was, I think, based on Juliet's house in Guernsey, which we also saw. Hugo's mistress. So I interrupted myself with those asides and then forgot to say, okay, so the hazard of breaking it down is that we don't get to just follow the momentum of the story. And when I read this, it was after I had been in Guernsey, and we went to the Cotswolds and had nothing to do but enjoy the countryside and read. So I just devoured it, read it pretty much in one sitting. So to the extent that interferes with your enjoyment of the book, I apologize, but I think ultimately it does help us get a lot more out of the story, to kind of relish the moments and reflect on the characters and think about it, and we'll come out ahead in the long run, I think.
I think also he really has set up things. You know, just you can tell here that there's a lot of I don't know, clouds, but there are also events that are important. I mean, the regatta contest, that was important. And so that's in our head, that if there's a contest, that we have an idea who might win it fair and square and with distance to spare, you know, that he's really good at that. We also have it set up that there's something solid about him, even if people don't know it, that there's something doubtful about Déruchette, even if she's young and might develop. And now we find out that Lethierry trusted someone who let him down. So that's, and sometimes when someone you trusted lets you down, it makes a difference. It's not as if you think, okay, that only happened once, that'll never happen again. It's been betrayed, it makes a difference. Yeah, that I didn't know, and that could happen. And now he's got this peculiar idea that the inheritor, the master of the ship, should also be the husband of Déruchette. But all he told her is don't marry a parson, and she forgot. Okay, well, you sort of see how if you break it down to the things that actually could move the story forward,
we've been set up well. Yeah.
I think so. Even if you might not be able to write it yourself, but then again, you're not the writer. And so I don't think that he's just spinning his wheels.
No.
And even if we've got this very peculiar thing of the people, the humor and the people of Guernsey having wrong ideas, which, and the narrator sometimes acts as if he's sympathizing with them. And so, we're a little unbalanced, but we're going someplace. It's not sort of as if we're all having a day at the, a picnic in the park, and then into this is going to come disaster. We can sort of see, including the sea, here we are in a dangerous place. I've never actually, the only island I ever lived on was Manhattan, and I don't think that feels dangerous, but in general, right, not because of the sea. An island can feel dangerous, as if you could get swallowed up, as if the chaos is around you. And
in terms of, Joseph had said at the beginning he loved how this section closed, because it seemed to bring everything together, sort of like you're indicating now that we've got Lethierry's desire to find somebody to take the helm the Durand and of Déruchette. And we've got, Déruchette has toyed with Gilliatt, and so there's this whole setup. But then there's this statement too on 117. It says that Lethieri wanted a sturdy top man, rough and weather beaten, an athlete of the sea. This was his ideal. This was not quite Déruchette's ideal. She had a rosier dream. So that indicates that they might be at odds in terms of what they're looking for her romantically. So that could pose problems too.
I just want to say about my feeling about where the book is going is, I feel like right now, just because a lot of it's sort of description about like Déruchette and the other character, Sarah, whatever, I'm sorry, the honest one. I feel like I've been given a lot of resumes and some high recommendations, and I want an interview. I'm looking forward to that, and I hope they live up to the recommendations.
I think I'm comparing it a lot, and probably will, to Moby Dick. I don't know if others have read Moby Dick, but there's, the sea is dramatic. It's a dramatic character, and the way in which it shapes very striking characters that are not normal, that you don't meet in normal life. He warns you at the beginning, don't go to sea if you're a landlubber. Don't think that this is going to be
won't go well.
Change you to just encounter the sea, and then encounter and live with the people who live with the sea.
Okay, assignment for next week. Reminder, the next week we meet on next week, and all the weeks thereafter we will be meeting on Saturdays at same time, 8 o'clock. And the assignment for next time is 123 to 183, which is about the same length of reading and conveniently brings us to the end of a section, which I'm going to try to accomplish from now on too, that we stop at the end of a book. So I think you'll enjoy this section. I look forward to seeing everybody next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.